Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of this godforsaken series, all about finding new ways to crash Roblox Studio. Chances are, if you're watching this, that it's not your first rodeo here, so I won't bother explaining things in too much detail, but if it isn't, then you should probably just go back and watch the other episodes first, given that this is following on directly from them. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right into the video. The first thing I decided to add for today's episode was some new gameplay modes. Up until now it's just been running around the place, so I wanted to try and spice things up a bit with some new systems. The first thing that I decided to add was this material, which I've called a flight plate in the game files, and what it does is it causes your character's speed to increase, and you also lose the ability to jump. I don't know what I'm going to use this flight mechanic for in the game, but a few ideas in the later worlds I've planned for will come to mind, so I'll keep those hidden for now as to avoid spoilers. And in regards to the other material that I added, I present this one, which is a swimming plate in the game files. Now this one works quite similarly, except it actually reduces your movement speed, and also it disables attacking. So this one hopefully should be quite fun for future levels in the game, particularly for one of the worlds that I've been planning for, because with the whole no attacking thing, I'd quite like to make some bullet hell stuff, so the kind of thing you see maybe in Toho. Now, the way that this works is actually fairly simple. In short, it essentially just detects what you're walking on and then changes your character's gameplay mode accordingly. In long,
each raw material stored in the game's terrain folder has given a special string variable with a specific game mode inside it. Here, I've got a script inside the player running after every random frame, which checks what the player is standing on. Then by firing the array down 3 starts to a game mode root part. This then alters the string variable in the player's model itself to have the corresponding game mode to the floor being stood on, which results in the alters the player animation, effects, and game mode properties.
Now, after finishing up the swimming system in particular, I quickly realised that I didn't actually have any enemies that would work underwater. Flying levels can of course both have the airborne Bakazai and Bandragai enemies in them, but I didn't actually have anything in my current roster that would make sense to have in an underwater setting. So with that in mind, there was only really one option, which was to make a brand new one. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you the game's first underwater enemy, the Kugel. Now, the name Kugel is actually another pun, which is pretty standard for a lot of the enemy names at this point, I think. You see, Kugel is the German word for bullet, but it's also notably present in the first half of the German word for pufferfish, which I won't say for fear of butchering another German pronunciation. Both of these translation jokes are fairly integral to the character's design. They become particularly obvious when you actually play the game. Now, personally I haven't played many bullet hell games, but I personally think that this is probably going to be quite a fun little concept to have an enemy that you essentially can't kill because you aren't able to fire your weapons, but it sprays bullets around and you have to dodge them. Given that you still have access to your sprint mechanic while you're underwater, I'd say it's a fair challenge, and overall I think it's quite fun, so I will hopefully be adding some more of those enemies soon enough. Now, for those who want to see how the code actually works here, it's not too complicated. I essentially just used the same script as the player attacks are created with, and then made that fire loads of times while the enemy spins around, just via an animation. It's not exactly as difficult as I first expected it to be, really, so I got that done far quicker than I thought I would. While I was focusing on the area of combat, I also decided to add 2 new attacks for today's episode as well. Each of them has a unique gimmick, so I'll be displaying them separately for now. So first of all is the one I added, which I like to call the Bubbler. It's an attack that doesn't actually deal any damage, instead it holds enemies in place for a few seconds while you get time to escape. It's probably best used on faster enemies like the Bandragite, and absolutely not against stationary ones like the Duodec or the Kugel. This one works simply by anchoring the humanoid root part of whatever enemy it collides with. For those unfamiliar with Roblox coding, a humanoid root part is essentially the secret main part of a character model. There isn't a single character in my game that doesn't have one. Second of all, I'd like to present the Seeker, a highly spammable attack that locks onto enemies and chases after them. In short, it's basically just the chaser attack from Cuphead, but nonetheless, it was a fun one to make. It pretty much just searches around itself for anything that has a humanoid root part, and then tweens the attack to wherever that is. The last thing of note is also that I massively buffed Flame Fist for today's episode. Worth mentioning about it is that I drastically increased the impact range, but more importantly that now it creates a small area of fire that deals damage to anything that walks into it. So it's kind of like a lingering potion in Minecraft if you've seen them. Other than that, we're pretty much done with the theme of combat, so I'll be moving on now. Now, it's not like what I just showed you was everything I added, far from it. In fact, I could probably make these videos much longer if I just covered every individual bug that I fixed, but nonetheless, I did also sort plenty of other more notable things that I've decided to cover now, given that they don't really fit into the prior themes of the video. First of all, I quickly added a snippet of code in the loading script to handle killing the player if they fall into the void. Normally this is handled automatically by Roblox, but since I'm using a custom character model, it's again something that I need to write manually, much like the animation script that I spent so long labouring over. Second of all, I decided to finally add a healing item that you can pick up in the game. This is what I've called the Piezo Cube, which pretty much just floats in place and heals you to full health when you touch it. It's a handy item to have for the game, but I don't think health pickups will be too prominent in levels, given my target difficulty demographic. The animation for it is actually the most interesting part, created via using tweens with entirely randomized orientations and speeds. Personally, I really like the resulting effect for this. Next on my list was something very overdue, by which I mean rewriting all the enemy AI. Frankly, the old AI code I'd borrowed wasn't working brilliantly when combined with all the attacks in the game, so I decided to copy the useful parts over and write my own enemy follower AI systems, which seem to work much more smoothly now. There's not much else to say really, the AI is just more efficient and robust now. Speaking of things that are vastly overdue, it's actually been 7 months since I first removed Newbie's face during the animation upgrade, and I never added it back. So I finally decided it was probably time to remake our little protagonist's face. Using GIMP, I essentially just drew some face frames that I've allowed various scripts in the game to access, making a somewhat animated face for the game. In the future, I plan to write my own camera system so that you can actually see these faces, but for now you just kind of have to know that they're there. The last thing of note is that I also added a script to essentially disable all of the collision between the player and the enemies, because for some reason the normal colliding stuff doesn't work. Not entirely sure why that happens, but with this script it's absolutely sorted, so I don't have to worry about collisions anymore. Well, I think that pretty much covers everything I've added for now. Having messed around with the camera script turned off, I did notice some issues with Newbie's animations and model, so I think I'll be redoing those in the next episode, as well as the Banjo Guide because of his shoddy animations. From that point onwards, I do know for certain that I want to work on a new camera system, the title screen as well, more songs, level customization system, and loads more, but that'll have to wait for now given that it's exam season once again. With all that said, I'll be signing off for now. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of you for watching these videos on this small little channel, and I hope to see you all soon in whatever dumpster fire of a video I decide to make next. See you, my fellow idiots. Bye! Which they alternate based on how each floor material stored in the game's terrain folder are given a specific. The flying levels can of course have the airborne Banjo Guide. Flying levels can of course have both the airborne bands. Flying levels can of course have both the flying. I made this one using the same code as using GIMP. I essentially just drew some faces. Using GIMP, I essentially just drew some face frames that I'd. Using GIMP, I essentially just drew some.
Kugelfisch.
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 Kugelfisch. That's but I'm not gonna bother.